Okay, so I'm Eric Owens. I'm a professor in the theology department where I teach ethics, and I'm also director of the International Studies program. Delightful to see all of you guys here. It's such a pleasure. For the past 4 years, I've been hosting events like this as part of what I call the Global Citizenships Project. And its core essence from its very beginning was to bring exceptional people who bring service to the world into conversation with small, intimate groups of undergraduates and one graduate student. And over those 4 years, we've had really amazing people sitting in this living room here doing exactly what we're doing tonight. And tonight, it's such an honor and a pleasure to have Charles Sennott with us as a perfect next voice here in our series. So thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
When we first started talking about this, it's just you all, what you said you're interested in, and I can't wait to hear some more of the details. You are the people we want to call to service in journalism. You all fit that profile. So thank you so much for thinking to invite me, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the way we're going to work today, and I hope all of you will show up also Thursday evening for your talk.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a word about that before we get going?
Sure. Just it's Thursday at 7. It's what I'll get better at which hall and everything. I can't actually.
I didn't write it down. I'm sorry.
I forget the name. I'll have it for you by the end. But I really do hope you can come. It's a chance. I would love to think of this as sort of a preparation for that, where we're really going to dig in on our mission and our call to service. So I think of today, if I understand, is to talk about my career and sort of what got me here and what the work we do, and I hope I can inspire you to do it. And then on Thursday, it will be really digging into our program and talking about the moment we're in and this call to service that we're putting out there, that journalism at its best is public service. So the title of the talk is Journalism and Democracy in the Service of Truth. And I think you can't have democracy without truth. And I think the founding fathers of this country and many leaders of democracies around the world have realized that a really independent and spirited free press is the key and the cornerstone of any participatory government or democracy.
Amen. So run out on Thursday, clear your calendars, and come to that event too.
And after the break, I'll have all the details.
That's right.
For you.
We've got your emails. We'll send you the info out to you.
Thank you.
So tonight we're going to start with a conversation between the two of us, and we're going to start with what it is you do and why it is that you're here, and then we'll move backwards to how you got to what you do, and then we'll talk about some of the values that sustain you in the work that you do, the challenges that you faced along the way, and the values you found more durable than others, and the ones that you've maybe set aside and decided were not durable enough. And then we'll talk a little bit about global citizenship, and then we'll break, and we'll break into small groups where each of you can get to know each other a little bit better and talk about some of these other questions as well. And then the two of us will circle around, and we'll reconvene in this room for questions from you to Mr. Sennott, whether they're practical questions about how to write a lead, whether they're who do you know that can get me a job, whether it's what did you want to do at the beginning, et cetera, whatever questions you have, whether it's about Ukraine or the Arab Spring or anything else. Okay, so that's the plan. So I didn't want to provide a short intro because this is all one long intro to the work that you do. So why don't we get started by having you just tell us what the Ground Truth Project does?
Sure. So the Ground Truth Project is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to support the next generation of journalists, that's you guys, and to support those journalists in undercovered corners of the world, and to tell stories that need to be heard that aren't being heard. And that is in short what we do. And we do that through 2 programs we have that are service programs. One is Report for America. So how many of you have heard of Teach for America? Just about everybody, right? So Report for America is Teach for America for journalism. And co-founder, Steve Waldman, wrote a report. He and I had been friends and known each other for years before we started Report for America, but he had this line in a report he wrote for the FCC like 12 or 13 years ago, and I never forgot it. The crisis in education has Teach for America. Why doesn't the crisis in journalism have Report for America? And it just stayed with me. And so we started that in 2017. But before starting Report for America, I had been doing a lot of international work. And another part of our mission statement was that we work in struggling democracies and divided societies. And so the work we did originally at Ground Truth, it's 10 years ago that I started it. Some of the original work was in Afghanistan, it was in Iraq, it was in Northern Ireland, it was in Israel-Palestine, it was in Myanmar, where there's a nascent democracy that's now been thwarted. It was in Egypt, where we had the Arab Spring. And I just had this moment in 2016 when I was watching our country really pull apart and become very polarized. As we talk today, I think you're going to hear that I am a social justice person, but I try to really keep partisan politics out of it. I really believe there is so much commitment and goodwill from both sides, from all sides. I always am looking to find it. But I think the moment with the election that we experienced in 2016 took America to a place I'd never seen before. I had never seen how divided we were as a country. And I realized, like, profoundly, that journalism is failing, that journalism is just not listening. We're not out there hearing stories because the polling around how was it that we had someone as divisive a character as Trump emerged to become the Republican nominee, polling is like really confusing except for one absolutely consistent through line. The people who voted for President Trump did not feel heard in this country, period. They don't feel heard. And you know what? They're not heard, and they need to be heard. And I think we as journalists have a sacred role to hear them. So in 2016, this epiphany hits, and we started Report for America. We had so much success with Report for America in scaling it up. It's a very simple idea. We have two competitions. The first is that we go out to newsrooms and we say, tell us the undercovered corner of your community that you have, like, and why you want to cover it. Give us a good reason for that. Show us that you're a public service news organization, and prove to us that you're real in your commitment to a new generation in terms of editing and really supporting a new generation. So if you can check those boxes, you can have a good shot at this, but you must apply. And then we have incredible competition to get this. So we now work with 220 newsrooms. And those 220 newsrooms we posted, and then reporters applied. And we've had a wave of emerging talent who really want to work with us. And that emerging talent really is sometimes straight out of college, but mostly after a few years of experience. Our average age is 26. We're seeing a lot of journalists who have been struggling, frankly. They were freelancing, or they're in a job that isn't that great, or they're not supported well in their newsroom, or they're not in a public service-oriented newsroom. And we're also, interestingly, getting a lot of journalists who are in amazing news organizations, but not getting to do real reporting. They're at ABC News, and they, are doing the things that are like the office work that are not the real deal, or they're doing social media. And that's important, and that's an incredibly important part of messaging, but it can feel like a gerbil wheel if that's all you do, and you don't get a chance to do your own reporting. So we're getting a wide variety of talent. Really interesting to me, we're getting quite a few veterans who have a sense of military veterans, who have a sense of wanting to be on a mission, and who feel and are incredibly competent. So if any of you are veterans, we have a really welcoming community for veterans. We have a lot of people who are more mid-career, who maybe one woman who comes to mind is a doctor. She was a pediatrician for 20 years. And she realized she really wanted to tell the story of her patients. She knew and worked with a lot of poor, very disenfranchised children. and she wanted to tell the stories of these families, and she wanted to be a journalist. And we welcomed her, and she now covers healthcare in Washington State for a small news organization. She's amazing. So the stories are varied, they're really different, they're kind of all over the map, but what ties these people together is they are all what we would call emerging journalists. So you can be 50 and 20 years as a pediatrician, but you've only got a couple of years of reporting, but you want to do that, you're emerging. You're straight out of college, you have a commitment to social justice, you're emerging. The hard part is you're up against people who have a lot of clips, who have a demonstrated interest in journalism. So I encourage those of you who aren't already writing for the news organizations here or freelancing or getting internships, get them if you want to be part of what we're doing. So Report for America is successful. We now have 325 reporters in those 220 newsrooms. We have about 1,000 reporters who apply for every 50 slots. It's very competitive. And it is, I think we have until COVID really hit, even the first year of COVID, we had a north of 90% return rate, people who stay with us for a second year. Under COVID, we're down to about 80%. And we recognize this is a uniquely challenging, distressing, exhausting time. We've all experienced it. But even with 80%, that's 10% over what we anticipated we would have. We thought 70% return rate would be great. So we are really inspired by the commitment of the people who joined us and what seems to be their satisfaction with the program, but we're hyper vigilant about that. And we want to be very attentive to serving them well in their journey as local reporters in these local newsrooms all over the country. So we're in all 50 states. As I say, the program has been very well received. We were just profiled on 60 Minutes. I don't know if any of you heard about that or saw that, but it was really a big honor. Hearing that ticking clock and seeing something you created is like both fearful, like, oh my God, what if they go after us? But it was also really rewarding to see, I think it was 12 million people watched that. And so our phones have been ringing off the hook, and we are really engaged right now.
So can you say a bit about what you provide your fellows in the Report for America?
Yep.
Is it a stipend? Is it training?
Yeah.
Is it publication channels?
Good. Yep. Thank you. We pay half the salary of a salary that is set by the news organization where you're working, and we help the newsroom raise the other half of the salary, but they're on the hook. When you join us, you are hired as a staff reporter with the same level of benefits and same level of salary as any other reporter at that news organization. The difference is we're willing to pay half because we want to give people a shot. And we want to inspire the newsrooms to cover undercovered corners of their community. So we always have the editors on our side. And they can say to the publisher, we'll lose half the funding if you don't let this reporter cover, race. We put 6 black reporters in Minnesota the day before George Floyd was killed. Like, what are the odds of that? We listened to the community that said, there is a real problem. This black community in our city is not being covered. So in answering that, we think we really helped those newsrooms rise to the occasion of an incredible challenge of a moment of racial reckoning in our country, which I hope we can get into a discussion and all agree we are still reckoning. It is really deep. It is really something to focus on. But we are in these corners where we know we're helping the newsrooms do what they want. So that's it in a nutshell. We give modest things like some help moving if it's a new place you're going to, but mostly we provide workshops. We have almost weekly opportunities for you to deepen your skills, and we sort of have these big quarterly events where we really bring in top folks. We've had a couple of people who've spoken to us are Dean Baquet, who's the editor-in-chief of the New York Times. We've had Pulitzer Prize winning reporters. We've had incredible photographers, like some of the best photographers in the world, and we're really proud that one of our fellows just won World Press Photo. We've had people who are into data reporting, investigative reporting, how to do a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, all those things that can take years to develop in a newsroom where you're not getting really nurtured, we provide for you. So I can get into more. I want to turn one corner, and then I'm going to shut up for a while, and we'll get into more Q&A. But just to unfurl this last thought, which is Report for America is successful because it's a service program. So in addition to reporting on this local community, which is a service in and of itself, we ask the reporters to do a service project. And that's typically working, for example, in a high school and helping that high school develop its newspaper or deepen its excellence around its own journalism. We have a couple of people who've done projects inside prisons and a couple of people who've done projects, for example, like in homes for the elderly, where they're trying to encourage them to tell the stories and to be storytellers in their community. But it's mostly the high schools, and it's mostly that is a critical component. It's mandatory that you roll up your sleeves and you actually do, physical service in the community as well. So that has worked so well that the global work we used to do was a different model. It was more, you've all heard of fellowships, right? Like you get a stipend and you go off and you do a project. And we used to do that, and we realized it's so high touch, it's so hard to scale and replicate. The strength of Report for America is it's relatively easy to explain, and it scales. So we decided to take our global reporting and start something we launched a year ago, which is called Report for the World. And Report for the World is about the same exact model. We go into countries and we ask the local newsrooms, what are your needs? What's not getting covered here? And how can we support reporters for you to be able to cover those issues? So it's not the foreign correspondent model. I am, as we're going to discuss and we go through my career, you're going to hear, I am a self-confessed foreign correspondent. We parachuted into dangerous places that are falling apart, and we brought home the story. It has value, it's important, but it's not as important as serving local news organizations in the countries where those things are happening. So I've kind of had this religious-like awakening, like, oh my God, that was such an errant way. Why don't we shift the model? And that prompted Report for the World. We now have about 30 reporters in Report for the World, and we're in Nigeria, India, and Brazil. We're just launching it, and we have our eye right now on Poland because of what's happening with Ukraine. So I just wanted you to hear that arc. So that's what Ground Truth is, 2 programs, Report for America and Report for the World, and they share that mission, which is to support a new generation of journalists to tell stories in undercovered corners of the world that serve those communities where they live.
Thanks so much. While we're on the work of Ground Truth project itself, if you were to say what's most important in an emerging journalist, whatever age or whatever their background, is it skill or disposition?
It's disposition, because you're going to get the skills through your life. So I think the key is to be open, to be curious, to have public service in your heart, and I think it's one of the most wonderful things about BC and the Jesuit tradition is that service is so woven into everything on this campus, and I hear the messaging consistently, and it's what really drew me to want to teach here, is that there's a spirit of service here. So I think I've got a really key component of what I hope will be great future journalists here. I think the other thing is adventure. I think you need to be willing to go way beyond the confines. That can happen in a lot of ways. It could be that you might be from Western Massachusetts, but you might end up in Mississippi as a reporter. So you have to have an adventure, and you have to have a sense of respect for other cultures and a sense of wanting to open out to them. It might also mean that you're a wildly progressive person, and you're in a really conservative part of the country, and you need to hear a new language and be open to other ideas and learn, and maybe hear things that surprise you, maybe even shock you, but that you learn that your opinion is not what this is about. That the discipline of great journalism and great journalists is to say, I'm going to tell the story, I'm not going to shape my opinion on it. Now, opinion writers are different. We're looking for journalists. So we really ask people, check your opinions at the door. We're not asking you to be neutral about everything. That's different. When you put facts together and you stumble upon an injustice, we want you to have what's sometimes called a fire in the belly, a sense of like, that's wrong, I'm going to report that. But the power is tell the story with facts and not with opinion. So that's what we're looking for, that disposition, and it is out there. I feel it. I can see it in all of you. So
let's take a step back a year or two to your college era. Tell us.
I should have brought a picture. You guys would crack up. I have the greatest picture that I can make audiences laugh with about what did I look like at your age.
Yeah, tell us what brought you professionally out of college. What did you want to do at that point?
Yeah.
What did you study, and how long did it take you to become a journalist?
The picture, give you a word image, my kids call it the Che Guevara dad shot. It's like long hair, beard, you know, like it was in a different time, and it was a different place. And yet I think I would have said all of the things I'm hearing you guys say. I wanted to be in the world. I wanted to be of service. I want to know what's going on out there, and I want to write. And I was lucky. I come from like the most ridiculously cliche Irish Catholic family from Boston you can imagine. And my mom grew up about 300 yards from St. Ignatius. My brother and sister went here. I went to UMass Amherst. I thought about going here, and I thought about going to Providence College, and every single friend of mine who I loved was already here. And I'm like, I gotta go see some other stuff. And I also felt like UMass was bigger. And I really don't regret that decision. I was really lucky. At UMass, I had a class with James Baldwin. It changed my life. And I had someone who was a national treasure who was telling me about writing and about truth, and it changed my life. It was one of those classes that changes your life, and that was really important to me. I also was lucky that I had a lot of brothers who did a lot of things, and one of them was a photographer at the Boston Herald. And this was in a time when film was developed in a bath of chemicals, and there wasn't digital photography. And so photographers at sporting events had to have people who ran the film from the floor back to the newsroom. And he figured, I got a kid who can do that for me for nothing. And so I would go in with him, and my reward was I got to be on the floor, and it was 1978, I believe, maybe 79, and it was Larry Bird's rookie year. That was my reward. I got to be courts. How many of you know who Larry Bird is? Oh my God, am I really there? Okay, thank you, thank you.
All right, yes.
Amazing basketball player from Boston who sort of a legend and defined the Celtics era in which they had all these championships. So when I got to see that great an athlete up close, it changed me. I realized I want to be courtside. Like, I like that. And every time I was kind of getting into it, my brother would hit my leg and he'd go, take the film, man, what are you doing? And I'd have these little canisters of film, and I literally had to run them back to the newsroom. And my point is, look, you're gonna have the big things that change your life. Like, it could be a lecture by Isabel Wilkerson, and if you missed the Lowell lecture that she gave, that's crazy. You've got these people on your campus who can change your life, who are coming here or who are teaching here. And I was someone who grabbed those opportunities. My dad died very young, and all of us were like, it got really real about putting yourself through college. I owned my own education. I painted houses with my brothers every summer, and we hung out. And I never missed an opportunity because I couldn't. And I want you to bring that energy and that intensity to what you do, because I think it can help you. And you know, I was really into journalism from right away, because my brother did that. So like 16, 17, I decided I'm gonna get into this too. And I used to hitchhike into Cambridge, and I worked at a tiny radio station called WCAS. And I didn't get paid, but we did advertise for a bar down the street called the Plough and Stars in Cambridge, which is a very good bar. And they were at that time a real center of political activity, particularly for the Republican cause in Northern Ireland. And the owner of the bar was Pádraig O'Malley. I didn't get paid at all, but we got free lunch at the Plough. I was 17, the drinking age was 18, so I wasn't that far off. But Porg would see us come in for lunch, and he'd put a pint of Guinness down, and he'd say, if you're old enough to work, you're old enough for a pint of Guinness. And so we would take the Guinness, and I'm gonna come back to Porg. I wanna keep moving, but will you guys remind me, Porg comes back into my life in Iraq, and I'll explain why, but I'll save that as a gem for later. But that was what I was doing, was just, my brother was in it, I got inspired, I met other people, and I took every opportunity I could to allow myself to be inspired and to kind of dream. So I started as an intern at UMass Amherst, took the radio experience, worked in college radio, then became an intern at WFCR in Amherst, Massachusetts, 5 college radio, now called New England Public Radio in Springfield. And that was my first job. That's why I asked where. And I covered the Valley. I really covered, the end of the industrial era in Western Massachusetts, the death of jobs in places like Springfield and in Pittsfield. And you think Boston is a humming economy, and it is. There are parts of Western Massachusetts that are not, and that are real stories. And we are in Springfield with Report from America. We are in Pittsfield with Report from America. And these are my old stomping grounds as a reporter. So think of everything that's around you. Think small, think local, and think about getting that experience.
So what's the first big obstacle you felt, not like to getting the story, but to being who you wanted to be as a journalist?
I think the obstacle is that, well, in the early days, there are a few obstacles. You're having so much fun. I was lucky. I had a very adventurous career. Even in Western Massachusetts, I was finding these stories, and I was like, wow, I love Springfield. I love this place. I get to go cover this, or I'd see that, and I stumble into a story about a guy named Victor Herrera who did this. Came across as a news flash from a police blotter that there was a robbery at the Wells Fargo station in Hartford, Connecticut, which was part of my beat. And it turned out to be the largest single-handed heist in American history, and it still is today, and he got away with it. And he went to Puerto Rico, where he funded the Puerto Rican independence movement. And I fell in love with this guy. Remember, I had the Che look going and everything? And so I really followed it, and that's what was happening. It was never boring, ever. But the money was not good. And I watched friends of mine, even friends who continued our house painting business. We had a house painting business called Brothers of the Brush. There was 5 sets of brothers, and it's still going. And my nephews worked there. I watched my friends who did that make more money than I did, considerably more. And I watched friends of mine who were landscapers make way more money than I did. I watched friends of mine who later would get into things that I didn't know back then would be called hedge funds. I would have thought that's got more to do with landscaping back then. And they've made incredible wealth. And so I've kind of watched income inequality in our country from the perch of a journalist. It's wild to watch, because not everyone is Anderson Cooper. He was born at Vanderbilt, and he makes about $5 million a year. That's unusual. Most journalists are hardworking people who are in communities, serving those communities, and who make, about what a teacher makes, which is probably fair, or who might make what a police officer makes. But they're not making extraordinary sums of money. And in many cases, the industry is really hurting right now. It's a hard job to get into, and it's a tough life to sustain. So the hurdles really appeared to me later, but I was ignoring them because I was just jumping over them and having fun.
Right? Yeah. Well, let's hop to the hurdles later then. So you set out into the world to do first in New York, early on, the first World Trade Center, you said you were present. How did that set you on your path to being a foreign correspondent and a journalist outside of this region?
So that's a really important chapter in my life, the first World Trade Center bombing. I want to tell you about that, because after working at the radio station in Western Massachusetts, I got a job. I went to Columbia School of Journalism. I painted houses for 2 years, made enough money to go to Columbia School of Journalism, and then went. And one of my brothers loaned me some money, because, as I said, those who were doing building and house painting were making more than I was. And I went, and it was a great decision, by the way. I really liked it. And it landed me in New York. I worked first at the Bergen Record, which is in New Jersey. Who's from Jersey? Anybody here? Okay. I don't know if you know it, but it's a small paper. And then I got into the city, and I worked at the New York Daily News, and I was a police reporter. And if I had my ID from then, when I was about 25 or 26 years old, you would laugh even harder, because I had a really bad mullet. I had shaved some of the hair, but it was like a ridiculous look. And I was covering cops, and I was in downtown Manhattan, and I heard a very loud bang. And you hear that a lot in New York. Who said they're from New York? Are you from the city?
I'm from Westchester.
Okay, but you know the city.
Yes.
So you hear like dumpsters are dropped by the dump trucks, and it's like bang, and then they set off the car alarms. It's common to hear a huge bang in New York. So I heard a loud bang, but it's not common to hear a loud bang and then hear an unbelievable amount of sirens. And I just was observing this, talking to someone in O'Diner in Lower Manhattan. I said, wait, sorry to interrupt. I think I gotta go. And I just went outside on the street, and I was in Lower Manhattan, and I saw people walking very fast, some almost running, away from the World Trade Center. It was 1993. So, bang, people running from the World Trade Center. They had soot on their faces. They looked scared. They had no idea what happened. No one seemed to know. And what's most stunning about the fact is that smoke is billowing out of the World Trade Center parking garage. There was a huge explosion of some kind, and people are injured and on the side of the road. And no one, and I am telling you, no one thought it was terrorism. It didn't even cross anyone's mind. You are of a generation where that's an immediate response, right? Back then, it was not even on the radar. And I was in that scene and doing something journalists do, which is you always carry a yellow legal pad if you can, and you nod confidently and you go past police lines, and you act as if you are a detective or someone who belongs there. It's like, you gotta perfect this thing. It's like, I don't do that. And you just keep going, right? And I did that, and I got under the police line. I started to see what this was, and it was so clear to me that this was a bombing. It was a 5-story deep crater with all the cars tumbled down into it. And I figured hundreds would have been killed, but it was 6 people were killed. 1,000 were injured, or thousands even. I forget the exact number right now. A lot were injured, but only 6 people were killed. And yet in the moment, it felt like this enormous event. And in the old days, they had this thing, it was called a payphone. It was before we had the phones we all have in our pockets. So I put a quarter in the payphone, I called my editor, and his name was Billy Boyle, and he was out of Central Casting for a city editor of the New York Daily News, which is the newspaper that, you all know Superman, right? Mm-hmm. Superman is based on the Daily Planet. That's actually the Daily News, and it actually was filmed in the building with the phone booth that Superman used to go into to change from a reporter to Superman. It's Art Deco genius. I love that building. I loved working there. Billy Boyle is up there. I'm down on the street, and Billy says, what's going on? I said, it's a bombing. And he said, no. Mayor just had a press conference. It's a generator explosion. And I'm like, no way. And he said, no, they just said it. Kid, what, the police chief and the mayor just said it's a generator explosion. And I'm like, no way, it's not. I'm telling you, Billy, it's not. And he said, okay, you got any proof for that? And like literally, I so wish I'd had a phone like we have now, because I could have videotaped this thing that happened, and it really happened. As I was talking to him, the bomb squad truck pulled up. And it said bomb squad. It was like out of a little cartoon or something. I go, Billy, bomb squad just pulled up. And he goes, wow. And that is a moment in American history where we realize we've been attacked by terrorism. I mean, we realize a bombing? Who would want to bomb the World Trade Center? So Billy's instructions to me were, get back here and start writing, get everything you can, but you've seen it, you've been on the scene, everyone else can get the police briefing. You have this a unique vantage point, get back here. And I went back and I started to write the lead story. And something about being a journalist is if you're the first there, and you do a good job, you can own the story no matter how big it gets. And I was a young reporter, and I was low man on the totem pole. But Boyle was a great editor, and he never let it get taken away from me. And he kept saying, you gotta keep going on this. And so I was going crazy. So I found out that in the rubble, they found the VIN number. Who knows what a VIN number is? You gotta have owned a car.
Yeah.
Isn't that like the identification?
Yeah, vehicle identification number. So they had the VIN number on what they believed was the actual place where the bomb was planted, which was in a truck. So I got a great source because I'm a police reporter. Cop says, you're not gonna believe this. Off the record, it's a Ryder rental truck. These guys rented a truck, we think. So I'm like, wow. Back in those days, you had reverse directories, you didn't have the internet, you had to figure things out. I'm trying to figure out where every Ryder rental truck center is. And I see there's one in Jersey City. It's right across the way. It's under the Lincoln Tunnel. I can go over there and I can see what this thing is, or Holland Tunnel rather. I go over and I'm there. I've been to 2 or 3 other places, but I finally end up in that one. And a guy, I go in and I notice everyone's acting really weird inside the Ryder rental truck place. And the front desk guy is like looking like, you know, something strange is happening. And all of a sudden a guy comes from behind the offices and he goes, can you come outside for a minute? He's like, unless you want to screw up an investigation, you need to leave this scene right now. Because I've already identified myself as a reporter. And he said, and I highly recommend you leave. I'm like, wow. So I just start like walking away, like I don't want to screw anything up here. And all of a sudden, like out of a Homeland episode, beat up old car comes in, dude walks out, goes in, something happens, and all of a sudden, every car suddenly turns into an undercover police car. And they go, and then trucks start coming, and then like you've got all this stuff with sirens and cops, and they're moving in on them. The guy went back to get his deposit for the truck. And he's the first suspect, and his name is Mohammed Salome. And they tried to tell us he's the mastermind, and I'm like, what? For a $50 deposit? Are you kidding me? So Mohammed Salome was Palestinian. Mohammed Salome was from the West Bank. And I went back to tell Billy all this stuff, and he's like, oh my God, this story's like never ending for you. You gotta figure who these guys are, out who these guys are. And he said, who are these guys? Why would they want to blow up the World Trade Center? It's 1993. And I have an editor telling me that's what you need to figure out. And Billy was such a good editor because he used to always give me assignments from the bar, which was right across the street from the Daily News. It was called McGuire's. And I spoke Spanish, learn a language, by the way. We were covering crack cocaine all the time. So when Medellin, Colombia was like blowing up, you all watched Narco, right? Okay. So when that was happening, I'm like, we should be in Medellin, man. He's like, yeah, whatever, shut up. And so one night, Carlos Galan is assassinated, and Peter Jennings on ABC News is talking about this, and he goes, who is this guy? And I said, he's the Bobby Kennedy of Medellin, of Colombia. He's their hero, and they just killed him. And he said to the bartender, his name was Jimmy, Jimmy, give me $2,000. He goes, you got a passport, right? Go. So I go to Colombia. And he did that. He would assign me out of the bar. So after we broke the story of the VIN number, we're out, we're hanging out, all these stories are starting to happen. He's saying, you got to figure this out. And he says to me he's probably about 6 drinks in, and he's like, you are the best, man. I gotta tell you, like, you're the best. This is the best story I've ever seen you do. This is maybe one of the best stories I've ever seen. He's going crazy with all the glowing drunk stuff. And he goes, you gotta go. You know what? You gotta go now to Egypt. You gotta go to the Sudan, because this is where all the suspects were from. And he goes, just go. I said, all right. So closed out my tab, went home, packed my bag, put my passport in my bag, go to the airport, and I flew to Cairo. He called my girlfriend, now wife, and he said, where the hell was Charlie? It's Monday morning. It's like, that was Friday night, it's now Monday morning, go fast forward. My wife is very smart, and she's like, let me find him and have him call you. She calls me up, she goes, you are in so much trouble. You didn't even tell him you went? I go, no, I knew if Billy knew, if I waited till Monday morning, he would have taken the assignment away. So I called Billy and he goes, where the hell are you? And I go, I'm in Cairo. And he goes, get the F-bomb out of here. I said, Billy, I'm in Cairo because you told me to go. And he goes, what? And I said, yeah, we were at McGuire's and you said go. And when you tell me to go somewhere, man, I go. And he goes, oh my God, man, you're fired. Like, I'm going to fire you. And I said, you said follow the story. Figure out who wants to blow up the World Trade Center. So anyway, that, seek forgiveness rather than permission is not a bad thing and you're early in your career. But be ready to be fired, because if I didn't come back with a good story, I probably would have been fired. But I went crazy, and he said, you have 2 weeks, and it better be the best thing you've ever written. And I went all over the Middle East, and I traveled like a banshee as fast as I could to get as much reporting as I could get done. And one of the things I reported on was the suspects were, I went to the West Bank, because that's where that dope was, went after the truck rental return. And I went to Khartoum, because that's where 2 of the taxi drivers in New York who were suspects were from. They were from the Sudan. And so there I began to hear about a very tall gentleman who was at something called the Islamic Conference, and that he is inspiring a lot of these people, including a man named Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, who was the Egyptian cleric who was the inspiration for this group that came together to try to blow up the World Trade Center. And I went into the Islamic Conference against every warning I had from my translator, my driver. None of them would come with me. And I went in and I saw this really tall guy in white robes who everyone called the Emir. And he was surrounded by Egyptian guys. And I tried to speak with them and I was told no, but I took a photograph. And that tall guy in the white robes named the Emir was a man named Osama bin Laden. And it's 1993. And I go see there's another guy, Hassan Tarabi, who was the spiritual leader of the Sudan at that point. And I said, I want to interview this guy, who people tell me is a very important leader here. And he said, Mr. bin Laden is a very wealthy man and a very busy man. And he's building hospitals and he's building things in our country. Could I walk into your country and say, I want to go see this person or that person? I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. And I said, but I'm really frustrated here. And he said, well, tell me what you're frustrated about. I said, I can't get my job done. And he said, well, if you will give me your notepad, I'll write a note for you. And I'm like, that's cool. So he writes in Arabic something, and it's all fancy. He went to the Sorbonne, he's very educated. And he hands it back to me, he goes, just show this. And so I show it to my driver, and he starts cracking up, and he says, this says, this man is a journalist. If he comes anywhere near you, please contact my office immediately. So you can't trust everybody, right? And so I kept going on the story. I come back with all that story, including the words Osama bin Laden, and we write a 5-part series called Seeds of Terror in 1993, which is not a bad title for a series in 93, knowing what would happen 8 years later. They didn't succeed in taking down the World Trade Center, but they tried. And for the next years, I became known as the guy who obsessively covered that. But remember, I was a police reporter. I was a cop reporter. And I did stories really close to the ground, but I got one and I stayed with it. And the Boston Globe, my hometown, the editor of the Daily News, the editor-in-chief, Bill Boyle's boss, became the editor of the Boston Globe. And he called me up and he said, man, you are crushing this story. And he said, but I heard about what happened. And what happened was, when I came home, Boyle said, I got bad news. They're going to kill the story. They're going to spike your series. And I'm like, what? They spent all that money? And this new editor, he's British and he doesn't like it because the guy went to Boston, right? So we have a new editor. Is anyone here British? I know you're from London. Are you a subject of the United Kingdom? Okay, please don't be offended. But I'm Irish, and when I heard this voice in this British accent, and he said to me, come in my offices any time that you want to, like, till my door's wide open, okay? So she said, please come in. And so when he killed my story, I thought, that guy said we can go in and talk to him, so I'm gonna go do it. His name is Martin Dunn. And I went in to see Mr. Dunn, the editor-in-chief, and he looked really annoyed that I was in his office. And I said, I want to talk about the series you killed. He said, yeah, mate, what's the problem? And I said, well, I think it's an important story, and I think we should run it. And he said, and Boyle's in the background going, oh my God, why are you in there, right? And he said, no one cares about terrorism, mate. Direct quote. I'm sorry to do this terrible British accent. I know I sound like Dick Van Dyke. But
I'm not from that part of it.
Okay, so no one cares about terrorism, mate. And I kind of lost it. To be honest, I kind of lost it. Boyle had so much faith in me. He gave me this amazing assignment. And I knew what I was about to say was not a good thing to say. And I knew it was going to get me in a lot of trouble. And to make it short and not to drop any F-bombs, I'll tell you, I just told him exactly what I thought. And I said, you got to run this story. And he just looked at me point blank and said, it's not your call, mate. So I walked out after dropping the F-bomb, slamming his door. Everyone was convinced I was fired, which is why the Boston editor called me. He'd heard, you're going to get fired, so come work at the Boston Globe. And Boyle came back to me and he said, I told you not to go in here. And he said, you should have let me handle this. I think you're going to get fired. And so before I could get fired, I ended up going to the Globe. Boyle called me about a month later and he goes, you idiot, the series is running, of course. If you had just calmed down, it would have run. But I ended up going to the Globe with the promise of becoming the Middle East correspondent. They wanted me to stay on the story. So, moral of the story, think very locally. And I always say this, I always say, report locally, think globally. Report locally and think globally. Like, remember, I was covering crack cocaine and I wanted to go to Medellin, Colombia. I was covering cops and I stumbled into a story that I knew was really complex and a narrative that would be with us for a long time. I didn't know it would lead me to becoming the Boston Globe's Middle East correspondent, and that I would get assigned there and for 8 years cover that same story of the Middle East unraveling and boiling and roiling and starting to see why people would want to blow up the World Trade Center, because they're really mad at America. And they have a lot of reason to be. And our foreign policy in that part of the world is terrible. And I began to really see it from the ground. And so when September 11th happened, I had already had 8 years of covering that story. It was becoming my beat. And it was just a moment in time where it was transformative. And I think back on it, and I think it's why I'm so interested in getting emerging talent, you guys, to work in local reporting, is people are skipping steps now. They're not doing the local reporting first that can lead to these amazing things. And they're trying to just go off and cover wars. And that's another one. Remind me to come back to that, but I'm talking too much, so I'm gonna stop for a moment so that
I'm gonna
my
ask
friend
one,
can
I'm gonna
ask
ask
a
one
question.
question, and then we're gonna break into small groups, because we need to make time for people to get to know each other and ask the questions to you. And that is, maybe we can end at the end of the evening about global citizenship, but for
Yeah.
right now, tell us about a time when the things you believed in most were challenged, your core values, something that you held
Yeah.
really dear, didn't appear to be true, and what did you do about that?
Okay, I mean, one of them, a core value of mine, was to want to go get great stories and see them published. You heard how I handled that poorly, right? I could have been better there. I actually think I could have handled that much better, but fate had it, that's the way I handled it. The one that really challenged me, the one that really was hard for me, was not covering mob trials or going off on this wild journey into the Middle East. It was when we got a call in the newsroom that a young man was claiming that he had been sexually abused by a priest. I told you I come from an Irish Catholic family. My mom, in most points in her life, has been a daily congregant. My uncle is a priest. My aunt's a nun. I love my faith, and I still love my faith. but wow, I just couldn't believe it. And what kind of ticked me off was the editors. This was that same scene of tabloid newspapering. You all know the New York Daily News is like a gritty street paper, right? It's not the Wall Street Journal. And so I didn't know what to do with this, and I knew the editor threw it my way. They literally took the call, and they were laughing while they sent it to me. They're like, Sennott, pick up on 6. But back then, you had all these phone lines that would light up. You'd have to hit it. And they were kind of laughing. And I'm like, I take the call, and this kid is not a child, teenager, is saying, this gentleman, priest, Father Bruce Ritter from Covenant House, has been sexually abusing him. And I'm like, this is 1989. This is way before Spotlight. This is way before the Catholic Church underwent the intense crisis that it has journeyed through, and I would argue it's still going through in many ways. This was way before we understood the depth of this problem. No one had ever really reported a story about priest sex abuse, except for one parish in Louisiana, and it was coming out at the same time. And the reporter who did that is now a very dear friend of mine and a colleague, but we were the first ones. And that challenged who I am, that was a hard story to report.
Didn't you say what it was the challenge? I mean, obviously that's a challenge in
I
itself,
didn't-
but you reported on
Yeah.
terrorism, and you reported on all kinds of murders and
Yep.
things like that.
Yep.
What challenged your values about it? Was it about reporting something about someone you loved, about a church that you loved? Was it about the nature of the crime? Was it?
I think it was disturbing to
Mhm.
have to go into that dark place.
Mhm.
I didn't believe this young person. It was hard to believe he was a street kid. And this was a priest who, by the way, had been named ABC News Person of the Year the week that I get the call. Do you all know the phrase 1,000 points of light? You ever heard that? So George H.W. Bush put forward a very famous policy for government work that said we don't need social services to take care of people if we have 1,000 points of light, if we have individual charities that can care for people. And when he said that phrase, 1,000 points of light, sitting next to Barbara Bush, you've all watched the State of the Union, right? You know how they do this? They have president speaking, and then they mention a major initiative, and they show the people in the audience who represent that initiative. Standing next to the First Lady is Father Bruce Ritter, because he is the example, a shining example of helping young street kids. And here I am knowing, oh my God, I've heard that guy is actually a predator. And I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to report it. What do? You have his word against his, and it took a long time. I don't think we have time to go into how I reported it, but you all, how many of you watched Spotlight? Okay, you saw the journey they went through with her. It's so depressing when maybe you're a lapsed Catholic, but you grew up with the knowledge of your faith, and you have family that you love who really take it seriously, or maybe you take it seriously. I have a great friend who was about to become a priest, and here I am working on this. And for the record, the person who was the most consistently on my side in trying to be sure to get out the story was my uncle, who was a priest. And he said, just go tell the truth. Just tell the truth. And that was challenging. It was really hard. It was really dark. And no one had done it before. I don't know if you can imagine that. Like, imagine the World Trade Center, bang, no one thought terrorism. Dark corners of the Catholic Church, a priest who's a predator. Imagine that terrain. It was just as difficult and just as treacherous, but in a very different way. And my mom was a contributor to this organization, Covenant House, as were many Catholic families. So he was a legend of, he was considered the Mother Teresa of America, helping street kids. And here I had this, long story short, about 5 other young people came forward as we began to inch our way into this, and I started to get wind of other people were making allegations. Story snowballs. There's a couple of big elements like the VIN number that happened, that we actually get the story publishable, and we wrote it. But to the day it published, I was so afraid it was wrong. I really was, and I wouldn't publish it unless we had it. And the paper was putting a lot of pressure on me to publish, and I had to sort of stand up for the basics, which are, I'm not going to publish it unless I really believe it's true, and I'm not going to publish it unless we have facts or something that we can put this into journalism. It cannot be their word against his. First of all, that will go nowhere, and second of all, we could be wrong. We could damage a person's reputation. We could hurt an organization that helps street kids. And I was like all alone in this really aggressive newspaper. They were like, run it. And I'm like, I know. And so I guess I'm proud that I stood up for the basics, which are, I have to have the time to see that it's right. I was 27 years old, so very young, right? And just, it was blowing up, and it became, I wrote a book about it. It's called Broken Covenant, and it's really about the journey into a story that sort of challenges everything that you thought about something you loved, which in my case is the church. And it was really hard. So I'll end there and say that was a good question. That was a hard one. Don't forget to ask me about Poor O'Malley after the break, okay?
All right, thanks. Let's pause and say thank you real quick.
Thank you.